Today I'm going to show you 5 tips you can use in Naraka Bladepoint that will instantly improve your gameplay and help you do better in your matches regardless of your current skill level. The best part is that for these tips you don't have to do any practice or you don't have to commit to any grind or anything. These are just things about the game itself that you can start implementing into your gameplay right away to help you win more fights. Also, if you like this video, then please consider subscribing for more Naraka Bladepoint and gaming content on this channel. Enjoy! Okay, so tip number 1, and you could apply this one to any other competitive fighting game that you play, but when you're in the middle of a fight in Naraka, you want to shift your focus from looking at what your character is doing to make sure that you're focusing on what your opponent's character is doing instead. And this one sounds like it should be pretty obvious, but a lot of people tend to get this wrong because we like to have what's called visual confirmation, where we like to see and confirm that the inputs that we're doing are correct and that we're not messing up our combos. But the problem is that by doing this visual confirmation, you're not able to react to what your opponent is doing as fast as you could. So your opponent could be throwing out the same attack over and over again and giving you hints on how to counter them, but because you're not looking at them directly and you're focusing on your own character, you never really notice. And this is really common among newer players that are still trying to figure out how the game works, or when you just haven't developed that awareness of what your character is doing without having to look at it. But once you start focusing on looking at what your opponent is doing during a fight and paying attention to what options they're throwing out, it's going to help you get a better read and making reacting to their offensive and defensive options a lot easier. Tip number 2 is pretty simple, but sometimes I still accidentally catch myself doing it, and more times than not I end up getting rushed and sent back to the lobby for it. But if you just manage to get a kill on someone who has better armor than you and you loot them, don't armor swap right away. And the reason for this is because in Naraka, if you loot a higher tier armor off of someone from their gravestone, that armor is going to be empty even if the one you switched it for was full, so you're going to be left pretty vulnerable and with no shields if you just happen to get rushed in the middle of looting. And since most third parties like to wait until the fight's over before they start rushing, you could be put in a pretty bad spot, so make sure you always check for third parties before you armor swap, and that's going to save you a lot of heartache. Also, I just want to add here that this doesn't apply to armor that hasn't been looted yet, so if you just happen to run into a body shield mid-fight, it's a really good idea to swap into it and get that extra armor, because being able to take one extra hit might be the difference between winning a fight and losing a fight. And following up on the previous tip, tip number 3 is that if you do happen to get rushed in Naraka, which happens a lot in my opinion, and you eat a couple of hits before you even realize what's going on, you've essentially already lost neutral game, and it's really common to see people in this very spot try to fight their way out from disadvantage and win an already unfair battle, instead of trying to reset the neutral. Remember that in Naraka Bladepoint, you always want to make sure that you're taking fights that are either neutral or in your favor. You never really want to pick a losing battle, and because Naraka is an open world battle royale and not an enclosed fighting game like Street Fighter, you have a lot of chances to reset the neutral by disengaging from the fight to heal up or get a better vantage point on your opponent. Even though sometimes you just won't be able to run away and there's going to be some fights that you just have to take, but if you manage to see an opening to reset the fight, you're going to have a better chance at winning if you're on equal grounds instead of trying to claw your way out of disadvantage. Some heroes like Matari are insanely good for disengaging with their stealth and the teleport and all the other freaking options that they have. Others can just spam abilities and try to grapple away, but the main point is that you never really want to take a losing fight in Naraka. Tip number 4 is the only one that you have to sort of practice, but I promise you that you can pick this one up really quickly. And it's going to help you in fights where you're running a ranged weapon on quick access like how I like to run it, and your opponent just manages to close the distance into melee range pretty quickly. So what you want to do is practice opening your menu and switching a weapon from your bag into your quick access slot as fast as possible. All you really have to do is click on a weapon that's in your bag and it'll automatically move into your empty spot, and this is useful for 2 reasons. Number 1, if you manage to get parried and you lose your weapon, since your character gets knocked down and there's a few frames where you can't really do anything, this is a perfect time to sneak in a weapon into your quick access and keep fighting afterwards, because if you were running a melee weapon and a musket for example, you really don't want to get caught using a musket at close range, so getting a switch in those couple of knockdown frames is your best option here. And number 2, if you want to avoid having to change weapons mid-fight, you can get rid of this problem altogether and get a quick weapon switch after you finish using your ranged weapon, but before you start pushing in for a melee range fight. And tip number 5 for improving your gameplay in Naraka Bladepoint is to keep trying different mix-ups, not just in your attacks, but in the options you use for defending and for approaching as well. What separates the good players from the not so good players in Naraka Bladepoint is that the good players understand how important it is to have different mix-ups in their decision making and to make their moves harder to read, because the more options you have for handling a fight, the harder it is for your opponent to predict what you're trying to do, and harder for them to get a read on you. And the problem here is that it's really easy for you to get into a routine of always using the same options in the game, like the standard 3-hit combo, or spamming focus attacks, or whatever routine you like to use. So it's really good to break that habit of repetition and try to figure out what options work best and how many mix-ups can you come up with to get the upper hand in a fight. And if you have any other tips that could help people improve in Naraka Bladepoint, feel free to leave them down in the comments so we can help each other out. But until then, thank you so much for making it this far, and now go check out this video right here.